But moving on to another official airport involved in the 9/11 attacks, as I've already examined the preceding Pentagon attack with the departure of American Airlines Flight 77 and the hijackers at Dulles Airport in another film of mine called 6 on 77, the Dulles Airport 9/11 cover-up, where I uncover that there was actually a minimum of 6 operatives who hijacked Flight 77, rather than what the official story purports, claiming that there was only 5 hijackers, by the way of unveiling the mistake made in the initial release of the Dulles security CCTV video with an additional Middle Eastern suspect first thought to be hijacker Hani Hanjour, subsequently before the release of the 9/11 Commission report in 2004, which had stated that a stewardess on board the doomed flight, Renee May, counted 6 hijackers through her phone call conversation on the flight. That circumstance with the FBI and 9/11 Commission reports investigations on Dulles Airport and Flight 77 gives us some validity to speculate inaccuracies and cover-ups about American Airlines Flight 77's official flight roster, as well as the weapons that were actually used, since in what I had also pointed out in the film, that Barbara Olson's phone call was picked up by an AT&T operator who had stated Olson said the hijackers had taken over the plane with knives and a gun, contrary to the loose interpretation of plastic-type knives detailed by her husband, Solicitor General Ted Olson, that then suddenly morphed into an absurd claim of box cutters. This is also a tremendously important detail because Flight 77 is the only 9/11 flight, interpreted by passengers, to have been taken over by box cutters. And one of the other features of the film 6 on 77, the Dulles Airport 9/11 cover-up, is demonstrating the situation of passenger screener company Argenbright Security with a Pakistani employee named Eric Gill, where on September 10th, the day before 9/11, he had a rude encounter with 5 Middle Eastern suspects at the West Checkpoint exit where he was stationed, with 3 of them being dressed in American Airlines ground worker uniforms, as they were having troubles gaining access, attempting to go into unrestricted areas of the airport that actually lead onto the concourse of where airliners are parked, potentially as a way of gaining access to pre-plant weapons on board Flight 77 and other flights. A story that was featured in the mini-documentary Unsafe at Any Altitude, briefly based on the underrated book with the same title by authors Joe and Susan P. Trento, which makes an example out of Dulles Airport with Eric Gill's story, that the real security vulnerability problem which made the 9/11 attacks succeed was the internal security inside the airport for the employees, not the security screening companies for the passengers, like Argenbright, therefore making the ultimate revelation that the federalizing of passenger security with the TSA was not the actual problem or solution in preventing further hijackings, that the private passenger screening companies were doing their job. Argenbright employee Eric Gill did identify 3 of the Middle Eastern men as 9/11 hijackers entering a restricted area of Dulles, but there's another problem with that. One of the hijackers Gill confirmed was Nawaf al-Hazmi, who does board and hijack Flight 77 there from Dulles the next day. But the other 2 were Marwan al-Shehi and Fayez Ben Hamad, who's supposed to be at Logan Airport in Boston, Massachusetts the following day, to board, hijack, as well as pilot United Airlines Flight 175. This becomes almost like another situation with Mohammed Atta and Abdulaziz al-Amari, as it seems to be another unnecessary route of travel the day before the attacks. But unlike Atta and al-Amari, this situation with al-Shehi and Ben Hamad is not part of the official story. Plus, as we just showed earlier with reports on the police and FBI dragnet scouring Boston, Massachusetts hotels and motels, where the hijackers and other unaccounted for conspirators stayed at, there is no news coverage or reporting of investigators on the scene at Milner Hotel, which is what the official story says, as to where Marwan and the 3 other hijackers shared a room and stayed at in Boston. Essentially, if Eric Gill's story is true in regards of what happened at Dulles the day before, with the presence of Marwan and Fayez, may also play as an inaccurate flight rosters regarding Flights 11 and 175 at Logan. However, incidentally regarding Flight 77 on September 10th, the day before the attacks as well, it was on its routine route in which the American Airlines plane was actually at LAX Airport in California before departing back to Dulles Airport in Virginia. But what's now known about the route the day before comes from a WikiLeaks dump that was picked up by the Telegraph on September 1st, 2011, titled The 9/11 Gang That Got Away, where supposedly 3 men from Qatar were supposed to fly in on Flight 77 to Dulles on 9/10, but ironically got cold feet and backed out of the operation, fleeing back to Qatar on a British Airways flight from LAX. They had only been in the country for 3 weeks posing as tourists. They allegedly carried out surveillance of the World Trade Center, the White House, the Pentagon, and CIA headquarters in Virginia. 10 days later they flew to Los Angeles, where they stationed themselves in a hotel near the LAX, which the FBI established was paid for by a convicted terrorist, who also paid for their airline tickets. Hotel staff told investigators they saw pilot uniforms in the Qatari men's room, along with computer printouts detailing pilots' names, flight numbers, and times, and packages addressed to Syria, Afghanistan, Jordan, and Jerusalem. It would be very hard to determine what ultimately their plans or flight designations were, or if they were supposed to accompany the Flight 77 hijackers on 9/11, or possibly even target another nearby airport. But that would also be limiting the scope pertaining to Dulles, considering when referring back to the Daily Telegraph article from September 20th, 2001, more planes to have been targeted, FBI, up to 5 other flights on September 11th regarded by FBI as suspicious, where it also says, a United plane due to fly from Washington to the West Coast was also a possible target. It was canceled at short notice, and the FBI is investigating a report that 5 men of Arab appearance left hurriedly. No flight number is provided, but with so much going on and covered up as we've demonstrated with the other airports so far, including the roster of hijackers on Flight 77, it is highly doubtful these were just regular Middle Eastern passengers. But again with the Qatari 3, it is possible they may have been designated by themselves to target that flight, or one at Reagan National Airport, which is closest to DC, or Baltimore-Washington International Airport.